Okay. Well, why don't we get going? My name is David Wilcox. I'm the senior research anthropologist here at the museum. Earlier this year, Dr. Sarah Herr of Desert Archaeology, Inc. Invited us to do a symposium for the State Historic Preservation Office's annual Historic Preservation Conference, which is going to be held in Flagstaff. And so I got with Peter Pillis of the Coconino National Forest, and we organized the symposium, and we did present it, 6 papers. We liked it went on so much that we decided we'd try it again here at the museum. And we've added 2 other papers to that, including one at the end by Peter himself. The theme is Avocational Archaeology, the contributions of Avocational Archaeology to historic preservation in Arizona. I'll begin with a short introduction that sort of frames that idea in a little bit broader context, and then we'll go through the first 4 papers. We'll then have a 10-minute break, bathroom break, and then we'll go through the last 4 papers, hoping to be done at 4 o'clock. There probably will not be much time for questions during the presentations. Perhaps you can catch the presenters afterwards to do that one-on-one. The contributions of avocational archaeology to Arizona are many, and to the southwest they're many and long. And I'll see if this gizmo is working. I put together a little bit of PowerPoint to introduce the general theme. And I thought I would start with 2 case studies. One person is named T. Mitchell Pruden, and he was the city pathologist for the city of New York. He began to carry out his vacations here in the Southwest beginning in 1892. Here he is at the Grand Canyon, but the people he mainly worked with in that regard were the Wetherill brothers, and so he would go to the Alamo Ranch in Mancos, Colorado, and Clayton Wetherill, one of the brothers, took him around the whole San Juan country, and in 1903 he published a very long essay about his observations from that survey in the American Anthropologist, National Journal. In 1907, when Alfred Vincent Kidder, as an undergraduate at Harvard University, was about to come out to the Southwest for the first time, he talked to Pruden and got his advice. Later, he would publish Pruden's obituary in the American Anthropologist in 1924. He was much influenced by the ideas that Pruden had, and one of which was published in this 1903 essay. He noticed that in this northern country of the San Juan drainage, there were small sites with a room block, a circular structure, pit house structure, and then a trash midden, usually with human burials in it, a household kind of social unit. But then there also were very large sites, which are long strings of a room block, long strings of pit structures, and then a long midden in front of them. And he recognized that the little sites were then the units out of which these large sites were built. And so he coined the term unit-type pueblo. And he had the idea that the social units represented in these small sites, when they aggregated together into the large ones, maintaining their identities, that you have then the beginnings of modern pueblo life in the Southwest. At the Pecos Conference organized by Alfred Vincent Kidder in 1927, that idea that the little houses preceded the large houses was incorporated into their classification. So the Pueblo II period was thought to be the time of small houses, whereas the Pueblo III period was thought to be the time of the larger aggregated pueblos. However, already in 1914, Pruden had a chance to excavate some of the small houses and compare the pottery in them with the pottery in some of the large houses, and he noticed that it was the same. There were some of the small houses that had identical pottery to that found in the large houses. And so he knew right away that it was likely, in fact, some of them were contemporaneous. They weren't successive, as he first thought, or as the Pegasus Conference later claimed, but rather it was a more complicated situation. It took another 10 years after 1927 for the rest of Southwestern archaeologists, the professional archaeologists, to figure that out for themselves. As they learned more about ceramics and the sensitivity of ceramics to temporal change, they realized that ceramics were a much better measure of temporal change than was architecture. And they soon learned that during the Pueblo II period of time, that there were also large structures, just as there were in the Pueblo I period. And so it's a much more complex situation altogether than was initially thought. But here we have T. Mitchell Pruden, who laid the foundations for much of those ideas and was shrewd enough, in fact, to be ahead of the professionals in correcting his first impressions. He later, by the way, on behalf of John D. Rockefeller Jr., was the head of the committee that helped John D. decide what to do with his medical facilities in New York City. He was a considerable scientist in his own right, but only an avocational archaeologist. The second person I wanted to call your attention to is this gentleman. Julian Hayden was his name. He was a member of the excavation team in the 1930s that excavated a site called Snaketown in southern Arizona, led by Emil Howery here on the left, Julian being next to him as a young man. Julian went up to Pueblo Grande in Phoenix. After that experience, he was also a silversmith, and he was at Pueblo Grande as an artist, but he became interested in the excavations going on there, led by Odd Hulseth, the director of the museum, who styled himself as a professional archaeologist, but really knew almost nothing about it. He was good with the ladies, however, and quite an excellent director, as a matter of fact, building that institution into an enduring one. We have to give him his due, but nevertheless, he was shrewd enough to see that here was a young man whose father was trained at Harvard as an archaeologist, who'd had experience in a number of places in the Southwest, including Snaketown and Keat Seal, where he also worked. And he put him in charge, then put Julian in charge of many of the excavations at the Pueblo Grande Mound. And as a consequence, we today know vastly more about it than we would have otherwise. Here's a model of what was on top of the Pueblo Grande Mound, made by Chris Downham over here at NAU. It's on display at the Pueblo Grande Museum in Phoenix. And you see it's a very complex series of structures and so on that were there. And we know as much about it as this because of the work Julian did. He later had a contracting business in Tucson, never had a professional degree, but again, he helped Emil Howery when he went back to Snaketown, and also did work in Sonora that's very highly regarded as an avocational archaeologist. Today, though, we come to work being done contemporary period by members of the Arizona Archaeological Society, and we're going to begin with 4 papers. The first by Joe Vogel, who's in the Yavapai chapter, lives in Prescott. Joe has 2 small planes that he loves to fly, and as he'll describe, an interest that I had in a place called Perry Mesa, and the idea of early warning for people, the idea of signaling, the idea then of hilltop sites from which one might signal, and the idea that hilltop sites stick up and so you can see them from the air, led him on quite a long series of flights and a tremendous contribution to the knowledge of Arizona archaeology. One of the places that he took photographs of was in the Verde Valley, and Jerry Earhart of the Verde Valley Archaeology Society became interested with my goading of several of these sites, and he will talk about a survey that he and the Society have undertaken now for the last 7 or more years, and their findings in the Verde Valley. And then Jim Graceffa, who was a member of that survey team, who's learned the ceramics of this region very well, and a team that he's worked with, including Diane, his wife, and quite a number of others, have now analyzed the ceramics from the over 300 sites that have been recorded, and he'll present the findings from his study of those ceramics. And then the fourth speaker will be Ken Zoll, the current president of the Verde Valley Archaeological Society, and his interest is in rock art. He's worked with Peter extensively at a number of sites, and he'll describe some very interesting findings that he's made about rock art in the Verde Valley. We'll then take our break, and then the last four, and I'm telling you all this up front so we get it on film, they can intercut later. After the break, Bern Carey, who is in a northern chapter of the AAS, and has been working out in the area of Dead Man's Wash north of Flagstaff, it will tell you about the survey he's been undertaking. Again, we got Joe to fly up there to record a great many sites, and Bern, in walking out to find them, has found 3 or 4 times that number out on that very rich landscape. And so he'll describe to you his findings over the last several years that he and his group of volunteers have made. Then Jerry Earhart will come back and give a second paper about a study of Aboriginal trails that he's been making for quite some years now. He's been reading accounts of the military in the 1860s and 70s chasing Apaches or Yavapai on Indian trails. He's been back to the National Archives and gotten copies of those military maps which label the trails, and you can match them up to the landscape. And he's coming up with some fascinating insights into the archaeology of central Arizona from these studies. I think it's a way of, to put it in scientific jargon, operationalizing the idea of long-distance exchange, something that Jim Graceffa, for example, will have documented in his earlier paper. We then will hear from Ron Krug, a member of the Verde Valley Archaeological Society, about a study of Paleoindian and Archaic projectile points that he's been making with Peter for quite some time. And finally, Peter then will talk about avocational contributions to Coconino National Forest archaeology over the last, 40 years, 35 years? Who's counting, you know? What I say is I have another 30 years, so I'm just getting warmed up. That'll be our program.